Good evening. Welcome to the generations.Serge. I'm Shannon here as the director. Pleased to see so many of you here, and I'm glad everyone found a spot. I know some of you are standing. We are, of course, deeply honored tonight to welcome Serge and Beate Klarsfeld back to the generations.Serge to join in conversation with Clémence Boulouque and with all of you about their lives, their work, and about the future of memory. Before introducing our distinguished guest, I'd like to thank all of you for coming, of course. I'd like to thank the Knapp Family Foundation and Charlie Knapp for making this event possible. Charlie is also a member of our advisory board, and I'd also like to thank all the members of our advisory board, including our chairman, Paul Leclerc, for their ongoing support. I want to thank the co-sponsors of this event, along with the Maison Française, the Columbia European Society, which is a student organization. In particular, I want to thank Marceau Ferrand and Paul Angelo Darisola, two students who first proposed that we organize this event and have worked with us to organize it. The Department of History and European Institute are also co-sponsors. So Serge and Beate Klarsfeld have devoted their lives for over half a century now to hunting down, confronting, and exposing Nazi war criminals, tracking them down in countries from Europe, to the Middle East, to South America. And among others, they helped bring to justice. They were responsible for finding and exposing Klaus Barbie, the notorious butcher of Lyon, where he was hiding in Bolivia, and uncovering Kurt Juschka, the chief of the Gestapo in Paris. And they were instrumental in bringing Maurice Papon, who was chief of police under Vichy, to justice as well. They've also devoted considerable efforts to tracing and commemorating the identities of victims of the Holocaust in France, publishing a number of books that restored the identities of victims, including the Memoir de la déportation des Juifs de France, the Memorial of the Deportation of Jews of France, which is a book listing the names of more than 80,000 Jews who were either deported from France or killed in France. And their work was based on copies of the original lists that were typed up for each deportation train found by the Klarsfelds in an archive of the Jewish community in Paris. The memorial provides the name, place, date of birth, and nationality of each deportee and the train that they were deported on. They also published a Memoir des enfants juifs déportés de France, which was translated into English as French Children of the Holocaust, a memorial, and Les enfants d'Isieux, which is published in English translation as The Children of Isieux, a human tragedy. They've published dozens of books. Actually, this is something that's sometimes less well known about their work. I'll mention this one additional one, which is their joint memoir that's been translated into English as Hunting the Truth, Memoirs with Beate and Serge Klarsfeld. And in fact, the reason that they're in New York this week is that they've been honored with the Jewish Book of the Year Award by the Jewish Book Council. So they received that award last night. And they'll be honored again in April by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, which is presenting them with its highest honor, the Elie Wiesel Award. They've collected many other prestigious awards. I won't try to mention all of them, but I'll mention just a few. In 2018, Serge Klarsfeld received the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor, France's highest award, while Beate Klarsfeld received the National Order of Merit, having already been decorated with the Legion of Honor in 2014 with the rank of Grand Officer. They were also awarded the German Federal Cross of Merit in recognition of their efforts to bring Nazi war criminals to justice. They will be joined this evening by Clémence Boulouque in conversation, my wonderful colleague here at Columbia. She is the Carl and Bernice Witten Assistant Professor in Jewish and Israel Studies, and has an appointment in the Department of Religion as well. And in addition to her academic work, Clémence is also a published novelist and essayist, and was previously a literary movie critic in Paris. Her current research interests include Jewish thought and mysticism, interreligious encounters, intellectual history, and networks with a focus on the modern Mediterranean and Sephardi worlds, as well as the intersection between religion and the arts and the study of the unconscious. So before asking you to join me in welcoming them, I just want to mention that there are filmmakers here this evening who are filming a documentary about the Klarsfelds. So by being here, you agree to be filmed. They will not be focusing on you, I can assure you. But I just wanted to give you that warning. And also tell you that we will have a very nice wine reception afterwards, so we hope that you can stay for the event and join us for this reception. And now, please turn off your cell phones if you haven't done that. And then please join me in welcoming our distinguished guests.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's a great honor to be in conversation with you. At home, when I was growing up, there were no superheroes. There were the Klarsfelds. So, which is a different. It's a kind of superhero, as we'll see. You were here a little over 2 years ago to discuss the publication of your memoirs, but that was in French. Now they were translated in 2018 in English. And so for those of you who attended the conversation with Adam Gopnik, I'll try to not touch upon the same topics. There's such a variety of things that we can talk about with you, so I'll try to maybe keep the biographical elements to a minimum and also try to see how we can have a conversation about the future of memory and what activism can look like these days. I would like to start with that day of May 11th, 1960, which is the day Klaus Eichmann was captured. Kidnapped, that's the day when we met. So that was not a good day for Nazis. So that the question I have is, so the Eichmann trial that took place a year later, was a turning point in memory and historiography. What was your, do you remember what thoughts you had at the time and how that sort of inspired you for your future rights?
Yes, the day we met was the day when Eichmann was kidnapped, but we didn't know that he was kidnapped because it was public a few days after, and it has no importance in our relations, not at all, but I must say it was a very important event, and it was the start of a new period of interest, historical interest for the Holocaust, and that trial in Jerusalem is an historical one, and I followed it because in France, as in all other Western countries at that time, there were journalists in Jerusalem, great journalists, French journalist Frédéric Potcher. Each day, each audience, he reported by radio and by TV, and also Kessel. So it was, how to say, a trial, the first trial where the witnesses could speak, and it was moving to hear them, and also it was the first great trial because all the trials which took place in Germany between 1950 and 1960 were trials where small people, small criminals of the basis were judged because the political society in Germany didn't want to have the trials of high responsible. So if a small criminal, somebody who killed a Jew, and there were witnesses of that, he could be sentenced even to life imprisonment. But high responsible were not put on trial, and they were protected by the German society, like in other countries, the accomplices of the Nazi, when they had high level of responsibility and high level of education. So it was quite a shame for the country, and until the Eichmann trial, I was not moved by the questions of justice, but it did not involve me in, as often it happened in the life of somebody. I was involved when Beate was involved, and it was a personal question which pushed us in being active in that field, while before we were not active. Beate, when she arrived in Paris, and she wanted to improve the relation when she learned about what the Germans did during the war, because in Germany at that time, in the 50s, at school she didn't learn because the teacher didn't speak about, and the parents didn't speak also. So it's only in France she met the bad image of Germany, and she wanted to improve that image. So she was candidate to be a secretary at the French-German Youth Office, which was created in 1963 by de Gaulle and Adenauer. And then she worked in that office, to improve the relation between German youth and French youth. And in 1966, in December 66, Beate reacted when a German high Nazi propagandist was elected as prime minister. She was fired, and suddenly we fall in the problems of Nazi. We were involved, and since that time we didn't stop.
Yeah, sure, because when I arrived from Berlin in 1960 as au pair girl, anyway, I would never have imagined that one day I would be involved in this program. But in Germany, you know, the journalists the parents didn't speak about, and we learned nothing in school. So coming to France, it was for me a new country. I wanted to learn also the French language, to see something new, but also I was confronted with the past of my country. I didn't feel guilty, but I learned when I learned also that Serge's father was gassed in Auschwitz by the Germans, very responsible for the Holocaust. So I had a kind of bad feeling and saying, you know, as a German, you have some kind of historical responsibility. And finally, it was not my choice, but as Serge told you, I worked in the French-German Youth Office, and when Kiesinger was elected, he was before Minister President Baden-Württemberg, we made a good job, but still to become the chief of the German politics, we decided that we had to do something, and as a German I said, now it's the moment as a German to show that we have a kind of responsibility. And I protested, wrote articles in a newspaper, this time left one, Combat, and I was fired. And I was fired because I had said it's not good to have a Nazi chancellor, but I always said we need somebody as like Willy Brandt, who I met him at Bürgermeister in Berlin, who fought against the Nazi. So it was, you know, if there hadn't been this moment to be fired from the youth office, perhaps, and then we started to say no. I will not regret, ask you can regret what you have said in the news, but I said no. So we had to go on, and then to go on, we changed our methods, and we will see later how we started to work and to be successful.
Yeah, we'll talk about the methods a little later, and the variety of them. Yeah, so much for improving the relations between Germany and France, because you created a little bit of tensions at times, but in the long run, you certainly did. One of the journalists who was sent from the US to the Eichmann trial was Anna Arendt, and she coined the term banality of evil. Is it something that throughout your encounters or your tracking down Nazis, is that something that you can relate to, that feeling of, yeah, la banalité du mal? Is it would that fit the psychological depiction of the people?
The question raised by Hannah Arendt about the banality of evil. Eichmann was not a banal person. Perhaps at the beginning he was just a clever young man, not brilliant, but when you are trained in a special field during years, and he was trained between 1937 and 1939, he was trained by in the SD, that means Informations Department of Heydrich in Berlin. He was trained in the Jewish question during 3 years, so he became a specialist. When you are a specialist, you are not banal. I believe a doctor who is a specialist is not a banal person when he is working in the field. He knows very well. So Eichmann was not banal as a person because the trial showed that he was a fanatic, anti-Jewish. He was happy to be to have the power to persecute Jews. He persecuted them as much as he could, and he took initiatives. He was creative in that field, and he did. If you are a technician, I would say he did quite a good job during the 4 years he was active. So he deserved his trial, and I believe that the Israeli took the good decision to kidnap him and to put him on trial, because the trial was really important historically, by the archives, by the work which was done, and also because the world understood that the voice of the witnesses has to be heard, and I could also, it has the influence on me to show me that the Shoah, the Holocaust, is not just statistics, 6 million, but it's 1 Jew, plus 1 Jew, plus 1 Jew, plus 1 Jew, 6 million tragedies, and that was a line I followed during all my works, to give to the witnesses, to the victims, a voice, and to give to each victim. As soon as I was involved in the judicial field, so I understood that I have to say who were the 75,000 Jews who were deported. At that time, the Germans said 50,000 Jews were deported from France. In France, the Ministry of War Veterans say 100 to 120,000 Jews. So I tried to find the truth. The truth was 75,000. So it was not necessary to say that it was more, and it was not necessary to say that it was less. You have to construct history, and you have to dig and find, like an archaeologist, find documents, and I took the opportunity of what we were doing for France in our actions, and to ask the presidency to give me the key of the archives. And Mr. Robert Paxson is here, and I salute him and I pay him homage. And I could get the documents that all the historians before could not get, because the door was closed. I opened the door, and I could publish these documents which were not known until that time. The only place where there were documents was the Jewish Documentation Center in Paris, now the Memorial of the Shoah, where in 1944 the researchers of the center found the archives of the anti-Jewish department of the Gestapo. But the French archives were not in public at that time. Since that time, they are public.
Yeah, I would like to add, because we had, as you was Hannah Arendt, the Banality Demand, but we had later then the opportunity to face the Nazi criminals as Leszka Hagen-Heinrichsen, and we went to see them. And I remember when we saw Leszka in his apartment, we had shown the documents he had signed. So there was never a feeling of pity for him. They only were concerned that we come and disturb their lives. They never had a feeling for the victims. And they also had, as in the trial later, they had said they did their work. So if they had been in Paris, as Leszka was, or Hagen, they would have refused to do the work in deporting the Jews. They had been sent to the east, you know, and how many Germans died in Russia because they were a soldier. So it was also an opportunity to have a good job, to be prepared, have a good life. And then the quality we saw, mainly Heinrichsen, who was in the Jewish department in France, who had, when he saw the documents, I think he was interviewed with the BBC, he had no feeling, you know, but the children, you know, the children were separated from the parents. That was not my problem, you know. There's really, I think there was from that, no of them had a kind of pity, and we had seen later, how?
Like Eichmann?
Like Eichmann, they had no feeling, you know, no, there was no regret, nobody, I think in all these trials, nobody had a regret and saying, I regret, you know. They always had nothing to, they had been not guilty because they do the job, and the job that they had to do.
So, I'm gonna talk a little bit about your encounters with those people, the kidnapping or the attempted kidnapping, but the activism, when you became really active in the late 1960s and the early 1930s, is also a time where another kind of activism and violent activism was shaping up in Germany. I'm thinking of the Army Fraktion, so the Baader-Meinhof groups. You were actually, you saw them on a few occasions, as you tell in the book. Was violent action ever on the table for you? What kind? Because there is a violence, psychological violence erupting into people's life. But was it ever something that you considered in taking revenge? I mean, the Court Leszka, you could have done it. Like you were really.
No, it was a violence which was calculated. Our violence, it was a strategy. We had to fight against the German political society, which didn't want to make a law, to sign a law, to ratify an agreement between France and Germany, and how to succeed when France stopped any pressure on Germany, and we had to, at the start, we had to pressure a country, a very powerful country, where the people didn't want to have such a law, and the political responsible also didn't want to have that law. So we were obliged to find a strategy. Our strategy was to act illegally. Act illegally in Germany, repeat always our actions, and take the responsibility of the actions, go to jail, and show to the Germans that they cannot keep us in jail because our cause, our demand is legitimate.
Yeah, the Nazis are free and you're in jail.
So the violence, and when Beate started by slapping the Chancellor, Kissinger, in 1968, That was in the German parliament, the first action, when Beate raised and told Kissinger resign. And Kissinger stopped to speak and was very impressed. So we decided that she will try to slap Kissinger in order to have that situation of the daughter slapping the father because he gave his intelligence, his energy to the Nazi at a high level of propaganda. And when Beate was immediately sentenced to 1 year jail, a few hours after the slap, so the judge asked Beate, could you use violence against the cancer? And Beate told the violence is to impose a Nazi chancellor to the German youth. That was the reply. And our violence was very weak, and we always decided to use a small violence. But I will give you an example. Kurt Lischka had his office in the center of Cologne, on the street level. So we sent a commando of young Jews who destroyed the glass windows, big glass windows of that office. So the Germans didn't want to have too many problems, so they sent us back to France by police. They sent us back to France. 1 week after, the glass was a new glass was. So we sent a second commando. So the commando destroyed the glass. That time, the commando was constituted of former deportees, and when they were arrested, so were you already arrested by Germans in Germany? Yes, they were arrested, they were in Auschwitz, they survived, so they could not keep them in jail, so they had to release them quite immediately. And they decided to make a trial of those who destroyed. And the day of the trial, we sent a third commando who did the same. So it was nothing as violence. And Kurt Lischka, when the first commando came, had his gun. He had the license to have a gun because he was a former Gestapo chief of Cologne. So he had friends in Cologne, and he had a weapon, and he could use his weapon. So it was small actions, but actions which were repeated 20 times. And the media in Germany were obliged to communicate and to transmit all these actions. And the German public opinion and the politicians also understood that they cannot keep us. And when I was tried, please tell to the jury if you want not to go to jail, tell to the judge that you will not do it again. I said, yes, I will do it again. So that was something new, and eventually we succeeded after 4 years of fight to have the law being signed by the German parliament, the Bundestag and the Bundesrat, and it took the name Lex Klarsfeld because we were behind, and it took us 4 years more to oblige the German justice to apply the law and to judge the Germans who deported, not the small Germans, but the top German Germans. Herbert Hagen was the head of, he trained the whole team of the final solution. Eichmann was his deputy. And Lischka was the man who was the head of the anti-Jewish department of the Gestapo for the whole Reich during the Kristallnacht, and he arrested all the Jews who were arrested after the Kristallnacht. So these were not small people. The trial of Klaus Barbie was known all over the world, but because it corresponded to the cliché of Nazi criminals escaping all over the world, in South America and so on. But Barbie was a small, not a small, but he was the head of the Gestapo in Lyon. But his superiors were Lischka and Hagen. And we do not live in France with Bolivia, we live with Germany. So the reconciliation between France and Germany, the last official barrier was the fact that the Nazi criminals were not judged. And with that trial in Cologne in 1979 and 80, because it lasted 3 months, so we had the end of the end of that period of fight between France and Germany, and all the presidents were always very grateful for what we did. And even Germany is grateful to Beate.
Yeah, Beate almost got elected president.
I was proposed by the lady. I wanted just also, you saw the photos here, this was in Cologne before the trial started. So I think also the Germans were not used because there was the Auschwitz trial in Frankfurt. So the Jews never came as to be the, they had a lot of supporters, remember, from the right wings and the pro-Nazi. So it was the first time that the Jews and the victims came to Germany to ask not for vengeance, but for justice. So I think that, we started in 71 with the campaign in order to get the 3 criminals to justice, and the trial was, the 10th was made in 1980. So I think it also was to see that Jews were for the first time active in this kind to ask the condemnation of the criminals of their parents. I think this also made a lot of influence in the German police, and we had even no help from the Jewish community in Germany. They were very much embarrassed when we came and arrested, It was really, and I think also they came, there was a young Jews, Betar, was a very engaged young Jews. But if we had not started in the very beginning to be this kind of illegal actions, we would not have this crowd around us. And the last day of the trial, we were able to have a special train without no Jews coming to Cologne, This was the first time that some Jews, we started, could mobilize so many.
And you can see young people occupying the tribunal of Cologne before the trial in order to pressure, and thousands of young Jews came for the trial, and we organized that coming from all over France to Cologne. And I must say that at the trial of Gustav Richter, who was head of the representative of the Office of Security, German Office of Security in Bucharest. So he helped to persecute Romanian Jews, and he was tried near Frankfurt. And I went to the trial because with Jean Angel, who was an archivist and historian in Yad Vashem, who was a specialist of Romania. And I was expert on the case of Romanian Jews who were arrested in France and deported. So we were at that trial. the audience room was full of friends of Gustav Richter. No Jew except Jean Angel and myself. And the same weekend, there was a basketball match between Frankfurt and Tel Aviv. So there were special planes coming from Tel Aviv, not for Richter, but for the basketball. So that was the situation at that time. And we did what we could, but no Dutch Jew came, no Belgian Jews. We brought them to the trial because we solved also the trial of the case of the Nazi criminals who deported the Jews from Belgium. We made public in 1975 that Ernst Ehlers, who was a SS colonel who came from Einsatzgruppen and who was the head of the Nazi police in Germany, in Belgium, was a judge at the administrative court in Schleswig-Holstein. And so we brought young Belgium, they had brought them to Schleswig-Holstein, and they occupied, and we started the case to oblige Germany to judge Ernst Ehlers and the head of the anti-Jewish department of the Gestapo, Kurt Asche. It took 5 years to obtain the trial, and the day before the trial, Ernst Ehlers, the head of the Nazi police, killed himself in order not to be sentenced, and Kurt Asche, after 6 months trial, was sentenced. So each case takes time, takes a lot of studying documents. You cannot accuse somebody without a file, and a file with the signature. We never were involved in any trial without documents bearing the signature of the man who was accused, in order to put him in front of his responsibilities, and not about speaking, not having witnesses, because witnesses can be after 40 years, 50 years, they can be, how to say, their testimony can be destroyed by a good lawyer, and sometimes they have not good memory of what happened. So we based all our trials on documents.
And to get to the trials, there's also a way that we somehow created of controlling the narrative and having the media report on it. I mean, when you failed to kidnap Lishka, it might have been a case of epic failure, but it's also, I quote you, a failed kidnap attempt could still be considered a success as long as it caused a big stir. So creating, occupying the media space and also drawing people's attention was key to your endeavors, right? It's always been a case of trying to shine a light and get the media attention.
We are, how to say, actors of former actors, because communication, the modern communication, we are completely incompetent with the internet and so on. We cannot use the same, and we have not to use now. We are, since 20 years, 25 years, we are involved in history and memory, and in the fight to build the documentation center, the place of memories, the former camps. I am vice president of the Foundation for the Memory of the Shoah. I am also one of the head of the Memorial of the Shoah, and I am in the International Council of Auschwitz, Foundation Auschwitz-Birkenau, le Camp des Milles in France, le Camp de Rivesaltes. I'm everywhere because as long as I can be useful, I am useful. And I took the initiative of many things, and the Mémorial de Drancy, I took the initiative with Simone Veil. So that's our work, and to publish books, interesting books. The books which were the most important, I published the memorial of the deportation of Jews was published in '78, and I published a new edition in 2012, alphabetically, and gathering families, and that was very useful because you have 1,000 of Levi who were deported, and the father could be deported in one convoy, the mother another one, the children in how to gather the families. So it took me a very long time to go to all the archives, departmental archives with a green light, giving me the possibility of photocopying the documents, and by compiling them, but it takes time to compile documents and to find that such levy is not the same, or it's a long time, but that was a useful time. If I was a normal lawyer, it would be wasted time. So I was a lawyer in the trial of Barbie, and our son took our follows us, being the head lawyer in the Touvier trial and in the Papon trial. And so that's a reply.
So, but making a splash, Beate. So we have a few of those moments. So that's after the slap, right?
Again.
Again,
Okay.
there's a campaign against Weitan, yeah.
That at the burial of Serge the former General Commissioner of Jewish Question. He was buried in Ardèche and Privas, I remember. And we went to Ardèche, first time in our life, but we didn't want to have only his friends there, because Xavier Vallat was a former war veteran. He lost a leg and he lost an eye. He was a brilliant member of the parliament, but he was High Commissioner, and he edicted the laws against Jews, and then he was fired by the Germans because he was not so in favor of killing Jews, but Darquier Pellepoix, who followed, was the second High Commissioner, was more fanatic than Vallat, but Vallat prepared the work of Darquier Pellepoix. So we wanted to be here and to remind to all those who come into the burial. So we were insulted, threatened, but the commissioner, police commissioner, came, and his wife was a Jew, so he protected us.
But what I mean by that is there is like among the methods there is a way of shocking, or at least grabbing attention by wearing the yellow badge. And so is that something that I know someone calls you, Beate, like a forerunner of the Pussy Riots, but like this way of grabbing attention and really by shocking, is that something that you both sort of elaborated together? Or is it something that just came to you naturally?
Well, no, this came because of the situation, you see, because when before I slept Kissinger, we put together a big documentation of Kissinger research. So we got the documents from East Germany, of the Minister of Transport. We got the documents here from Washington. And I went to the universities in Germany and I spoke to the students. They were interested because for them they saw that all Nazis were in the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the German Parliament, but they didn't react immediately that now there's a chancellor who's involved. So I sent these brochures to the members of the Parliament, and so they said, oh, he was elected democratically. So in order to be successful, you have to, if you see that in this way, you cannot succeed, you have to change the methods. And the methods were, to interrupt his speech in the parliament and the slap, but it was not my, I would have been happy in sending the documents to the parliament there, they would have, no, that's not a good chancellor, but it was not the case. So we found possibilities, always very well prepared, and all this kind of demonstration announced by the media, So we had also the kind of manipulating the media, and media generally, when Kissinger was elected, there was nothing in Israel, neither in France, to his past. So we had to break the silence, and the silence you can only do if you are spectacular. We never had been violent. We endangered our life. We received a bomb at home. Our car was bombed. We had threats. But I could have been shot when I slept Kissinger, but I stand behind him. But it's a kind of way to adapt. If you want to be successful, you have to change and you want to say, I never had been together with in the German. I had met too. I was in my 68 in Germany, but I had been concentrated on my problem. This was to bring Kissinger to us, to slap him and not to allow him to be around for the next election. But I never had been, together with these groups who was fought against capitalism and and then also Vietnam Krieg, against America. They became also very anti-Israeli. So it was not my field. I had been concentrated. I think you have to be concentrated, not to go right and leave. You have to follow your decision and then to go to the end. And then we always used methods, but they were also, I would say, because of surrounding, So, and when I came to Kissinger, I had a friend from the journalist from the Stern, and I told him, what I'm doing. And he came with me and he took this picture.
So you always had someone to document what you were doing. Which brings me to a controversy that followed the slap and also brings into the questions that this kind of this kind of gesture might involve. There's a girl, Heinrich Böll and Günter Grass, who were kind of in a disagreement about what you did. Günter Grass said what rational arguments had not achieved, i.e. front page news, an irrational act did. But Heinrich Böll sent you flowers many times. So how do you feel about this idea of actually you had to be irrational in order to achieve what you had to do and to achieve justice in the end?
I know that there was not the only one, Günter Grass, who said it was not the way to do. He wrote, after the election of Kissinger, he wrote him a letter and saying, if you're an honest man, you have to resign, So he didn't give me an answer. And Heinrich Böll, yes, when I came back from Paris after I had been sent to 1 year of jail, but I was released until the appeal. So we received 50 red roses, but he also had made a preface to a book about our book about the Kissinger fire. So at this time we had already known very well. It was the Jaspers also there had been, but the most part of in Germany at this time where Nestbeschmutzung was not well. This slap was not well received, not at all. But later, we changed quite a lot. And as you said, I had been proposed to be the candidate for the presidential elections, and we had been decorated with the Bundesverdienstkreuz, and we changed quite a lot with our work. And we said when the trial came in Cologne, we had I think the Germans were very helped a great part that we solved this problem, and Schmidt was Chancellor. They all agree what we have done. It was a good thing.
Oh, nothing to add or to contradict.
So what is also striking is that the 60s are a moment where performance is really important, like in the arts, in the arts and happenings. So did you feel that you were creating those moments of happenings, you know, like, or was it something, did you take an inspiration from art, like in the way you sort of created this strategy? Is there any, how was this, the thinking process, you know, going into it? Chaining yourself up in wars? I mean, those quite, there is something which is almost not aesthetic, but like there is this performance that you were doing, so how did it come about?
But you know, the fact that, you know, I've been welcomed when I started Kiesinger about my campaign, and Kiesinger was well known and well received in East Germany, you know. But as I always had something in mind, as I said, we never had been used when we had the help from East Germany when we campaigned against Kiesinger to publish our documents, so had been invited for the 20th anniversary of East Germany. I met Ulbricht, that name. So I was honored by them, but when I saw that in the Eastern, in Poland, the Jews were, after the war, had to leave the country, and we saw also the anti-Zionism in Prague. So I decided, as I had always been, you know, my solidarity showing to when Jews are threatened or in danger. So I said it's my role as a German and Jewish to go to protest. So that's the reason, and to go. Also here I had in advance told to one of the journalists that I will enchain myself in Warsaw and Prague. So it was this was I have also distributed the leaflets in Polish and in Czech language. But this was something for me to do because I could not stand, even if I had been very friendly with the RDA, with East Germany at the time, but I could not say that here is something what's not good, and but then we are, Serge and I, are not more allowed to go to East Germany.
So you mentioned the work of the historians. You also did the work of the historian in a way by compiling. You spent an incredible amount of time in the archive. In your book, you don't mention historians so much. And so, what is the difference? How would you describe your work as opposed to the work of a historian? Or is there a difference between writing history and creating memory? So, how do you see the difference between the art of the historian and la différence entre histoire et mémoire, en fait. Parce que dans le livre, vous avez parfois des mots, enfin, vous n'êtes pas forcément, mentionnez pas forcément énormément les historiens, et donc quel est ce travail de la mémoire versus le travail de l'historien?
Can you translate the English?
Sure. I was asking about the difference between history and memory, so I was like, retranslating that.
So the work of an historian is to try to find the truth about events, and the memory is something subjective, very subjective, and each one has his memory, which is not the same as another. Even the Nazi criminals have their memory, but no, to memories, to give to the victims, to the witnesses, the possibility to express themselves by publishing books, by taking audiovisual testimonies, and work of Schindler, the work of
Spielberg.
the director, that great director.
Spielberg.
No, it's also that possibility to have the victim, to know from the point of view of the victims what was the drama, the tragedy, and not to remain only in the historical explanation of what happened. A witness can explain somebody. I so often hear people explaining what happened to them in France. They are good witnesses of what happened to them, of each event they remind, but they don't understand how it happened and who was responsible, because they don't know history. So the two are complementary, and also memories to create the places of memory. And I remember when I came to New York the first time, not the first time, but the first time to study in 1978 in the archives in Yivo. I went to a bookshop close to Columbia, because my friend Peter Hellman, who is here, lives close to Columbia. And there were about, it was a big library, but a big bookshop, but there were about 100 books on the Holocaust. Today you have 50,000 books, but perhaps even more than 50,000 books. At that time, in Europe there were no one thesis, no one university work about. Today you have hundreds of theses. Thesis means that it was not like in 1955 or 65 or 75, amateurs going to, during a few months, working on a subject about the Holocaust. But today you have a thesis, it's 2, 3, 4 years at least, and the books are very strong, and they give a light of a scholar and not the light of somebody who has his opinions and write anything. So now you have many scholars correcting the books which were written in the 50s or in the 60s or in the 70s, because they have access to documentation. The documentation meant that our generation had to build a great documentation center like Yad Vashem, like those which are in Berlin, Wannsee House, the Holocaust Denkmal, the memorial in Berlin. You have the memorial of the Shoah, which have millions of documents. You have here, you have Washington, you have New York, you have Los Angeles, you have a documentation center in each country in Europe concerning Jews, because the Holocaust took place in each country in Europe. So in each country, in Serbia and Macedonia, Skopje, you have a great memorial with all the documentation concerning what happened to the Macedonian Jews, and everywhere it's the same. So there is no, I'm not worried at all for the future of memory, because you gave the title Future of Memory. I have not at all. Everything is known or being in the way to be known. Each page of the Holocaust is being studied, and you even saw the Père des Bois digging everywhere in Eastern Europe in order to find the bones and the proofs and to locate and to make maps and so on. So I have no worry. The worry is political situation, because if the extreme right or the extreme left or the extreme right united to extreme left take the power in a country, so the day after, you can say goodbye to the, not to everything, because it will remain in other countries, the documentation. I'm not worried that the documentation will be destroyed, but you will, in that country, you will not be able to study really, frankly, what happened. You see that in Poland, where the national historians are threatened to, if they study frankly the truth of the relations between Poles and Jews, Poles who were not Jews and Jews.
Before turning it to the audience, I have one last question which touched upon somehow. So just yesterday you signed an op-ed in the Figaro, and you also took out advertising pages during the election to campaign, to express your concern that Marine Le Pen would, win. So you campaigned with Emmanuel Macron. So do you want to talk a little bit about the upcoming European elections and this, what's at stake? Because you've been really vocal. So there are no longer any Nazis to track, but there is new fights. And so
Yes. In 2000, I'm always in the 19th century, in the 20th century, in 2015, 3 years or 4 years ago, before the regional elections in France, we were afraid that the extreme right could take the power by elections in the north and in the southeast, in Nice, by the city where I was during the war. Yeah. And we published our memoirs, and immediately all the TV opened their screens for us, and we could make a campaign. Also by meetings, to convince some of the left voters to vote for the Republican of the right, in order to have a coalition against the extreme right. And the extreme right was a great favorite. And they lost the elections in these two parts. And if they would have won, I'm sure that at the presidential elections, it would have been perhaps a disaster. Don't forget that in 2017, at these elections, you had extreme left against extreme right, and Macron succeeded to have more voices at the first ballot, but not much. And if not, you would have extreme right, which is anti-Semitic, that's sure, and extreme left, who is anti-Israeli and often anti-Jewish also. So we made a campaign, a very strong campaign also for Macron, and we bought pages of newspapers in order to ask the people of the right and the left to vote for Macron. And today also we have decisive elections for Europe on May 26th, and we campaign. We already published 4 full pages in Le Figaro, and each time we can speak at the radio or TV, we ask people to vote for Europe, for pro-European parties, because the new generation, they forgot, and maybe in France where people are often unhappy, they forgot meant war and suffering, and they are unhappy with their daily life and with their social.
I think we're going to talk about it a little bit
In the social field. So they are in the street. There are not many, but they are permanently in the street asking more money. They want. These people are poor. They want to be rich. Don't forget that the second day of the Gilets jaunes in Paris, they not only destroyed the shops and took but they tried to go in the good avenue, good streets of rich people to go in the apartments. So it's we have to fight against that violence, against that misunderstanding of what is really their conditions. You know, during the European Union brought peace, freedom, social protection. People live each year more than a few months more than. They are now 84. When I was a child, everybody told me at 65 you will be dead. I'm 83, I'm still there because not only there are good doctors, but also because the conditions are very different. And people don't know that. They don't want to understand that. So Macron is explaining that pedagogically, and he has ours free to explain, and we are explaining by very, how to say, very simple sentences. We are explaining why people must vote for Europe, because if there is a defeat in Europe generally speaking, of European parties, it would be a disaster, and the defeat of all the values in which we lived since 50 years. So we don't want that, so we oppose that. Priority is not the fight against anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism, it will take a long time to stop anti-Semitism. The priority is to defend the Republic, the French Republic, the French state which is protecting Jews and all citizens, and to defend the European Union, which is the most important ambition of all the European countries, and which is worth not to be destroyed.
There seems to be a traveling mic, so just raise your hands.
And keep it short, and it was a question has a question mark.
Hello. So, what do you think are the differences between the different types of trauma between history and memory? Are they encoded differently?
Again, because we did not understand well the question. If you can.
So, trauma, is there a difference in how trauma is thought about or is studied between history and memory?
I don't see a great trauma between history and memory. The trauma comes when historical events come on your head, but between history and memory, they had themselves to know better a situation. If you write in a book about the Holocaust in the city of Przemyśl, 26 Jews were killed. So it's a statistic. If you have 10 or 20 testimonies of survivors saying what happened to them in Przemyśl, you understand better what happened to the 26,000 people who were killed in the city of Przemyśl. That's all. And a writer, it depends, if he writes a book about Przemyśl, so he will include the testimonies. If he writes a book about the Holocaust, generally speaking, he will just put a sentence. So I don't see trauma between history and memory. I don't see. It's only, it can be when there is a political regime which writes the contrary of what happened. So you can have a trauma if you read that there were no one Jew killed in the city of Przemyśl. So you would be, that's negationist, revisionist books, but they are not historical books. They are so-called historical books, but they are really not.
Yes. Downtown in New York City, there are plaques to Philippe Pétain and Laval in the sidewalk, in the Canyon of Heroes. Now, this was...
If you take it down, take it away.
The mayor of New York City decided...
Yes.
The mayor of New York City had a committee to consider
I know.
these kind of monuments. Now, I've been having a dialogue for a number of years, even with Jewish organizations.
Yes, I know. In New York, you have a plaque saying that Pétain and Laval were there. Pétain in the 30s. That's a problem of history and how to say what happened after an event. There was a controversy also in France with how to say the role of Pétain in 1917. So it's not because Pétain was the head of Vichy France and that he was a criminal who was sentenced to death in 1945. It's not because of that you must say that Pétain didn't do anything, or you must, like in the Stalinism time, watch Pétain from a photo and so on. It is really because Pétain was a glorious and a clever general in 1917 that he could have the prestige who brought the French people behind him in 1940. And I would never, as an historian or intellectual or a free man, I would never take Pétain out of... I will take Pétain out when Mitterrand put flowers on his grave. So when you put the flowers on the grave, that means that you honor the whole personage, the whole Pétain. Or the whole Pétain, it's 1917 and 1942. So we opposed very much. We went to the grave before. I made then a very great flower with the best florist in Paris, with to François Mitterrand with my gratefulness, Philippe Pétain. So the police arrived and so on, but that's a scandal which can provoke, of course. And Mitterrand was obliged to change and to make a law in our favor. But also in the Invalides, in the Museum of Army in Paris, I went there. There was a buste of Pétain, Maréchal de France. So I wrote to the Gouverneur des Invalides and I told him, Pétain was sentenced, so you must put, below you must put, Maréchal Pétain was, Philippe Pétain was sentenced to death in 1945, and he put it. So you can change, but you cannot change the reality. In the museum of the First World War, you cannot expel Pétain, like because he was operative, very much operative during the war. So during that war. So it's, but it's a problem which happened always, and. I had a meeting. I had a meeting a few days ago with the great rabbi, and the great rabbi told me, Le Corbusier, which is a known.
You mean the chief rabbi of France? Yeah, the chief rabbi of France.
The great rabbi told me, Le Corbusier was anti-Semitic, so we will oppose the homage to Le Corbusier. So I told him the greatest anti-Jewish man in the 19th century was Alexander III, who was the Tsar of Russia and who initiated the pogroms in all over Russia. And he has his bridge, which is a very known bridge, Alexandre III. Try first to move Alexandre III to Alexandre II, who abolished the slavery in you know, and if you go back in history, you have Saint Louis who hated Jews, you have terrible. You cannot solve these problems. You can try to solve them, but it's very hard and it gives always controversies.
Hello, my name is Elie Wiesel. I'm from Amsterdam, currently at Columbia. And before I ask my question, I want to thank you for your work in all those years, making sure that people who commit those horrible crimes cannot escape justice. I think it cannot be said enough that that is an enormously remarkable achievement, and I thank you very much for that. The question that I have is, you have studied those people in depth. You know them, I think, very well. You have also looked at people both from France and from Germany. And my question is, and it's a question to you both, I think, do you see differences in perpetrators from France and from Germany? Are they differently motivated? Do they have different ideas or different backgrounds? So is that important, that difference, or didn't it matter where they came from? They were criminals altogether.
The difference that I will ask Dr. Paxson if he agrees, the Germans wanted to kill Jews. The French crime was to give the police and the prefectural administration, that means the French state, the power of the French state to edict law and then mainly to arrest Jews and to give them to the Germans who needed the French police, who wanted the French police to arrest them, and who had not the men, the police forces, in order to arrest them, because the final solution in France started in 1942, and it's summer, June 1942, and not in 1940. And so the crime it's a crime against humanity to give the police to arrest, like in the great roundup of the Veldiv, thousands of children, and to separate them from their parents, and to deport the parents first, and to deport the children alone in convoys of 500 people. It's a crime. The crime was, I always say, compensated by the fact that the French population, French churches, helped very much the Jews to survive as soon as they saw that children are arrested.
I think we have time for another 2 questions, and then we'll continue the conversation around this wine and at the reception.
First of all, thank you very much. The starting point of your activism was this kind of awareness that as a German, as a Jew, you had to become active, go to trials, hunt Nazis. And you talked a bit about the European elections that are in May. Do you think that this kind of historic responsibility is still a way to shape politics and to become active?
I think that in Germany, you know, or perhaps I have heard also that a lot that the Germany made a very big effort in order to go over their past. But the young youngsters too, because when I was in school in the 1950 Germany, you know, there was nothing taught about the Holocaust, about the Second World War. Today you have, as we told before, you have the centers, you have the Holocaust Eichmann, you have Wannsee Conference, and you have in all the camps, you have a museum, and the youngsters are instructed in school by the teacher, so there's a big chance in the youth today, no problem. But you have also those who doesn't know, you know, who say it's a long time, we have history and Holocaust denial, who say we have to change now, and the past is the past. There is, for instance, the chief of the right-wing party, AfD, Gauland, he said, you know, the time of 1933 to 1945, the Fugitive, there's nothing very important, you know. There is something else, but there is, we have to, we reported, we had been, we pursued this Gauland, this particular didn't accept this plan. But there is a change, and the youth today, you have youngsters from Germany going to Auschwitz to see the camps. No, there is certainly a big change, but you have also to show them that they have to fight. The right-wing party is today the strongest opposition party in the parliament, and there perhaps the youth has been more engaged. I remember when in the 60s when we fought against the right-wing party called at this time the NPD, I would say there were more youth in the street than today. They have more the feeling that it will come over and perhaps it will wait and perhaps there will be a change. But I think that generally, as Serge told also, you know, for the European elections, that people have been more engaged. We put the ads in the newspapers, but in the big population, you don't see for the moment the fear they have that something can change. You know, when in 2000 the right-wing party in Austria, the FPÖ, came into the government, there were big demonstrations. We went with our groups to Vienna. There were thousands who came, and Europe boycotted Austria. Today we have other parties. We have other countries where the right wing, as in Italy, is also in the government. So what I was saying is the youth has to be informed, and it's a teacher, and perhaps also an engagement, I don't know, but we try to do our best.
All right, one last question.
This is on, yeah, okay. First I want to thank both of you for inspiring me, the 20-year scholarly work on your topics, especially the children of Lisieux and the two mothers of Lisieux in terms of the Marty trial. So I had a conference here 21 years ago that was inspired by your work. It was called Hidden Voices. But my question, I'll do a simple question. I've seen that you have advised on certain films, recent films like La Havre. And I was wondering if you have a favorite film that deals with the topic.
I would say that the most important was the film of Shoah of Latzman, who just passed away, you know. And you also, United States, the first one was Holocaust, no? I think this big theory, so these films, but today, you know, open in France or in Germany after, you have always documentaries on the Second World War. And
Each night.
Each night, you know.
Each night you have a movie, because now there are many channels.
Yeah,
so
I
each
just
day
you had a favorite fiction film.
for sure, because not only fiction. I don't like fiction, but as Claude Lanzmann, who was a very good friend, the fils de Shaul, the son of Shaul, was a good fiction movie, and there are some good movies also about the great roundup of the Veldiv, Les Guichets du Louvre. So, but in fact, I give a great importance to the images, photo of films which were filmed during the war, archived.
Okay, I think it's also very fitting to end on a tribute to Claude Lanzmann, who left us in July last year. And on that word, I'd like to again thank you so much for your work.